This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government, as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie, City on the Move. My name's Arif Khan, and it is my pleasure to be joining you wherever you're receiving this content online, at home on cable. Thanks for being here with me. In this series, we aim to cover the city of Barrie through governance as well as operations, give you a sneak peek inside what it's like for those who are tasked with delivering a quality of life to you today, as well as for those joining the city in the future. And today, it's my pleasure to be joined by Kevin White, who's the new Chief of Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. Chief, thanks for joining.
Thanks very much for having me, Arif.
So, I've known you for a couple of years, and I have had the pleasure of getting to know your personality, know you a little bit operationally, know your role, and watch your climb through the service. And I think it's important to let the folks at home know who you are, where you came from, and how you end up in this fantastic role, and this new challenge that you've pretty much raised your hand to and said yes to. But give us a bit of an idea of your journey over the last almost 30 years.
Amazing, yes. In 1995, I started on the volunteer fire department here in Barrie, and I was fortunate enough to get hired here in 1998. I worked through the ranks to where I am today, 27 years after that.
And during that time, I guess as you say, you would start as any new recruit, and I imagine a lot has changed over the decades. But one of the things that actually struck me, and one of the reasons why I guess I got to know you, was aside from the role and aside from the operational challenges that you face on a daily basis, you also took a special interest in advocacy and improving the lives of those you serve with in a role that saw you going to Queen's Park and saw you going over to Parliament Hill. Tell us a little bit about sort of that special interest that you took on.
Yes, well, I got involved in government relations very early in my career, and that was around the year 2000. So for 24 years, that was a passion of mine. But I also moved through the ranks in the association as well and became the association president in 2016. So that was a term that I held for almost a decade and thoroughly enjoyed.
Absolutely, and so through your work, and I imagine that's a collaborative effort from members throughout the international or maybe nationally, what are some of the things that you can say you achieved during that time, and really that really built a level of trust and confidence amongst your peers for you in this role?
Well, I really enjoyed the government relations side of it, but one of the highlights for me was when I was able to go to Ottawa and at the Health Committee to lobby for different firefighter issues, and I was really excited to be able to get the front of the line access for a firefighter during a pandemic, which who knew we would need that 10 years later, but that happened when COVID-19 struck us here in Barrie.
So many things have changed, including the way the service is delivered, but also the type of calls you were attending to, the type of materials that you're finding yourself faced with, and therefore I imagine technology continues to evolve. What are some of these technological advancements that have come about as a matter of necessity, I guess, due to some of the challenges that you face as a firefighter?
Well, firefighting has changed a lot over the years. In the olden days, houses used to be brick and stone. Now they're synthetic materials, plastics, and glue. So they burn very hot, very fast, and very toxic. But what we need for that is new technologies in our gear to protect us, and also things like thermal imaging cameras that allow us to see through some of that smoke, which give us a chance to find our casualties quite quickly and hopefully save our citizens of Barrie.
And so along with that, I guess that's some of the things that you advocate for, but also I guess suppose some of the bunker gear and things like that has had to adapt as well, whether it's weight or the ability to move in that gear under the weight of that gear. But again, as you said, we've gone from natural materials that are that you're walking through to more of the toxic elements. So I imagine that the respiratory gear and the bunker gear as well is adapted similarly, or?
Yes, it's mostly the bunker gear where it protects us from permeation. And that's really hard to do because the toxicity soaks through your skin. So they can protect us with a breathing apparatus, which is important and of course essential inside a fire. But soaking through the skin is what really we have to protect ourselves for. And our decontamination today is much more thorough. So we need to get cleaned up very quickly after a fire. And we've learned that over the decades of firefighting.
So I want to take just a moment because, maybe it's just me and maybe I'm being completely self-serving, but when I was a little kid, being a firefighter was one of the things that I dreamt of. It didn't happen, I'm not, but that manifests into looking forward to watching the shows on cable or TV or in the movie theater. Let's dispel some of that, though. We're going to burst some bubbles, and maybe someone's going to throw something at the screen as I ask you this question. But what are some of the things that is reasonable for the everyday citizen at home to think about is a day in the life of your role? And then let's talk about the reality of it.
Right. Well, I actually wanted to be a firefighter when I was a young boy as well. My father retired from the Hamilton Fire Department, and that was really cool for me to grow up with a firefighter in the house and a role model as my dad. So that was a really awesome opportunity. Back to the movie side of things, though, there's a lot of TV shows and movies out there about firefighting. Some of them are pretty realistic, and I think that's cool. The problem is that you can see inside the fire. And that's for movies and TV, because it wouldn't just be a black screen otherwise. But we need to be we can't see inside those fires, so we need to be able to use our technology in order to be able to see through that black, thick smoke and find the people inside the building. So yes, the technology's changed, but the movies stay with kind of what they can see on the screen, and I think that's important to show you what we could go through in a day, and some of them are pretty realistic, as I mentioned.
So as I'm trying to visualize as you're describing this, you roll up on a scene, maybe the structure, and by the way, we're going to talk about actually what is the day in the life. I'm going to ask you about that. What is the day in the life of a firefighter? And it may surprise some, but it's not all fire. But as you roll up on a scene and perhaps the structure is fully engulfed, what are you doing as you pull up, and how are you preparing yourself to go in? And then let's talk about actually how do you find the casualty, the person who maybe is unconscious in the structure?
Right, so when we pull up to a scene, we have to work very quickly. We have to establish a water source, which is usually a hydrant on the street, and we get lines into the front door or the closest area to get to the building as fast as we can. We get our crews dressed up, and that's in their full bunker gear with that self-contained breathing apparatus. We get inside very quickly, and we start a search pattern, whatever the time of day indicates. So if it's a nighttime fire, we want to head to the bedrooms first. If it's a daytime fire, we may head to the family room first. We do that based on time of day and what's going on in the community at that time. So things would change if school's in or school's out. We have to adjust our skill set for that. We get in very quickly. We search very quickly, thanks to the technology we talked about, and hopefully make sure that everyone's safe when we get them out.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about you are responding according to the scenario. How much information on average are you walking in, or does that vary?
Well, it varies a lot. We can pre-plan a lot of the buildings and be prepared as much as we can for what we're going to get to when we're there. But I would say I respond to your house. I've never been to your house, and I have to go there. It's fully involved in fire. I get in the front door and I crawl from there on because heat is very hot and banks down. So having not been to your house, or the watchers at home, I would be able to go in and crawl through your home and try and find you. And it's quite challenging to do that when your house is on fire.
I can imagine so. Yeah, absolutely. And it's dark. Now, you're dealing with some thermal imaging, though?
Yes.
Yeah, so that has greatly assisted, I imagine, compared to 20, 30 years ago.
Definitely has.
Excellent. Now that's residential, and I can imagine, some of the typical causes that we've heard about historically are a cigarette that may be left on, or something, maybe a heating element that touches a drape, or some form of a flammable substance. Has that evolved as well as, again, our structure types change and our habits change? Is there something that has evolved in terms of what the most common sources of a fire are at home?
Oh, definitely. Many times over the year, careless smoking was number one for a lot of years. Fortunately, smoking has banked down a little bit, and that's helped. But in addition to that, we've had some cooking incidents, and seniors particularly, we have some things that they can use in fire prevention, like holding on to their spatula when they're cooking. So it reminds them, why am I holding on to this spatula? Oh yes, I'm cooking. So these reminders are very helpful. Candles are a huge factor today, where careless smoking is gone, candles have come in, and candles would cause a lot of house fires when they're not properly looked after.
And so, public, that we're talking, basically, that's a perfect example of public education. So aside from firefighting, a great deal of the role in the career and the profession has shifted to a focus on education. Talk to me about what some of your team and your colleagues are working on in that regard.
Definitely. Well, we have an awesome fire prevention team, and that includes public education. And we also go out into the community with something called Alarmed for Life, where we see about 10,000 homes per year, and we gain access to the ones where we can when they're home, and we check and make sure they're safe. It's not a ticketing program. We're there to make sure they're safe and give them suggestions, and hopefully build those relationships in the community, so when they do need us, they know who we are, and we're there to help them quite quickly.
And how often does that campaign run? Is that a constant campaign, or?
Yes, we run that campaign annually. We see 10,000 homes a year. It usually starts as soon as the spring clears, and it goes until Fire Prevention Week, which is the second week of October.
Awesome. So I guess for anybody at home, a firefighter or someone in uniform knocking on your door actually could and should be viewed as a welcome time. You'd pay somebody to come in and do an inspection, and it might cost a couple of $100s. There is an amnesty here, basically. It is an information session. You're not getting ticketed. The goal is safety.
Absolutely. We just want to look after public safety, and as I mentioned, our fire prevention team is awesome, and they guide us through this and make sure that they keep the statistics and make sure that we can continue to improve that program and evolve in the safety of our community.
Now, during your 30 years, plus or minus, with the service, again, you've seen a lot of change, you've seen a lot of growth, a lot of evolution of the profession. When we come back from the break, I do want to sort of switch gears away from the obvious of a firefighter is fighting fires, but get into some of the other disciplines and some of the other really services, because it is Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. So let's get into what some of those services are, and I think that's probably equally fascinating and complex, and if I'm right, it actually probably takes up a little bit more of your time than firefighting itself. Fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Excellent. So stay with us for more from brand new Chief Kevin White, Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and I'm having a great conversation with Barrie Fire and Emergency Services Chief Kevin White. We were talking about, before the break, obviously how you found yourself in this role, your career, some of the milestones in terms of advocacy and improving the, quality of life of those who are serving in the profession. We got into some of the firefighting elements, but the fact of the matter is, much of your time and that of your firefighters is not spent fighting fire, and let's get into some of that. So when we don't see lights and sirens racing to smoke or something along those lines, there are a number of other the emergency services part of what you do as responders. Give us what's really the sort of the top the top frequency calls that you're attending to as a firefighter.
Well, we attend a ton of different calls every day. We average about 33 calls a day here in the city of Barrie, and that works out to about 12,000 calls for service per year. We see about 50 or 60% medical calls. We go to a lot of vehicle accidents. We're geographically pretty close. We're around the city, and we can get to your house within about 6 minutes, 90% of the city. So that's really important, and I think that's something that we can be utilized for to get safety measures there very quickly. And I think that's important.
I think that is important, and I think that really sort of sheds some light into what you're doing when there's not a fire. You said 6 minutes you can get to pretty much, you said 90% of the destinations within the city, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it's not just about fighting fires. You're also first on the scene many of the times, much of the time when it comes to a motor vehicle collision or a health call. Talk to me about sort of the dynamic, because just sort of laying a bit of a picture, the Barrie Police Service it falls under the municipal governance in terms of budgeting, but it's relatively autonomous in terms of their operations and their business plan and their strategic plan, et cetera. Then there are the paramedics services who fall under county oversight and county budget. Now, of course, Barrie residents pay into the city, which then hands a check over to the county for those services. But Barrie Fire and Emergency Services is a division of the city of Barrie, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And we work seamlessly with those organizations to make sure that our public is looked after regardless of the type of call that they make. And we want to make sure when someone calls 911 that they get the service that they deserve, which can be all of those, which is called a tiered response. And whether it's to a vehicle accident or a fire, we rely on those services to respond with us and make sure that people are properly looked after when their time of need.
Okay, so typically speaking, in most of your stations, you've got 4 people on a truck who are rolling up, for example, onto a collision, and you might be a few minutes ahead of police and or paramedics. What's the first thing that's happening?
Well, we could be. Depends on who gets the call first and how that call comes in. Sometimes they don't think that they require extrication or something like that, but we're here to help no matter what. So we can help when someone's in a vehicle accident, stabilize the patient. We usually get inside the vehicle with them, and then we remove the vehicle from the patient, which allows for us to have best access and pass it off to our partner agency, which is the paramedics, who actually transport the patient and look after their care to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that I'm smiling, because when I heard you say that, I was like, did you just stumble? Was that a mistake when you said that? But actually, in fact, and technically and intentionally, you are removing a vehicle from a patient.
That's correct. We can't remove the patient from the vehicle because sometimes they're injured. So we make sure to get the best possible access, especially for our paramedic crews. We want to make sure they have access to the patient without harming them any further. So we remove what parts of the vehicle are required, and then they have easy access to get the patient out.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that there's a bit of a dynamic role in a partnership or a relationship. So your members often find themselves assisting.
For sure.
Or handing off to the most appropriate, who then take the lead, but then you support. You stay on scene until it's over, basically.
Definitely, and we're all here to support each other, and it doesn't really matter at the time who's there first or last. What matters is looking after that patient, and I think that we can do that by making sure that we get there, ambulance transports, police make sure the scene is safe, and I think that's really important to make sure that we're not causing more problems from the accident that's already happened.
Mm-hmm. So we're dispelling a couple more rumors. Sorry to Kurt Russell in that fantastic movie, where there's a little bit of an us versus them. In your career and what you've seen is a very collaborative effort, obviously patient-centric.
Oh, definitely. And we're all here to look after the same people, and that's our goal every single day.
Yeah. So not every collision is the same. We have seen, and I find it a bit of a phenomenon, but I have my inside voice talking to me about what that might be about. But we've seen what appears to be an increase in the number of single vehicle collisions. And what's that about?
Well, I certainly don't know always what causes the accidents, but certainly distracted driving is one that can be a significant issue in our community. And we want to make sure that when drivers are on the road, they're paying attention. We all have cell phones. We all have distractions that are going on, a lot to think about in our minds. We need to focus on the road and make sure we get to our destination safely. And I think that that's really important while people are focused on looking after themselves and their families.
So a number of your calls are also to assist. You might find a collision happening on the 400 series of highway. Obviously, our city is bisected by the 400. You're basically first to respond or there to assist the OPP if there's a collision in there. Those are big trucks. Those are big trucks. They serve a purpose.
Definitely. Believe it or not, in my career, I've been to 3 more than 100 vehicle pile-up crashes on the 400. And I'm one person. I worked a quarter of the time. So it was unbelievable how many people can end up in one accident at one time in bad weather conditions. So we want to make sure that people are safe all the time.
So you have 400 series accidents, which could be multi-car pileups. They're weather-related potentially. You've got some that are happening in some hotspot intersections in the city. I do know that whether it's the CAA report or the report that the Barrie Police Service puts out, we've got some higher frequency collision zones. How do you pre-plan? And I'm throwing the word out there, I'm kind of teasing you with the word, but pre-planning is part of your daily life. Talk to me about that in terms of resource management, human resource management, and just planning for seasonal changes, et cetera.
Right. Well, not only around accidents. We obviously know when an intersection's a little off kilter, there seems to be more accidents there. And this would be interesting back to your study of what you're referring to. But we pre-plan all of our work. And I think that that's important when a new building goes in town or there's an underground park that's unique. Our crews go out and they make sure that they know how to best respond to that building, house, intersection, ravine. We're out there making sure that we know how to respond to an emergency in any of those situations, and our crews are always ready.
So we'll come back. I do want to come back to some of those types, and maybe we'll do that in the next segment. But you also mentioned that a large portion of your calls for service are medical related, so not the fires and not necessarily the collision, which obviously would potentially include a medical element to it, but you're also responding to medical calls. What are some of those like?
We have some basic medical equipment, but we also have some ability to help with things like Narcan. If we were to have an opioid overdose, we would be able to do that. Now, of course, they're giving that out to the community as well. So generally when we get there, they've already had a dose or two of Narcan, but we're there, we're able to help and provide some rescue breathing. We're also there to do some sort of more basic medical assistance until our paramedics get there and they arrive, take over, and transport.
And it's actually, as you were saying that about the Narcan, quite true, certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe more, but certainly my personal experience of having a couple of kits in each of my vehicles, I think I've actually come into a scenario where I actually did use one of them, and I'm glad it's only one, I'm going to say that. And just anybody who does happen to have a Narcan kit, they do have an expiry date. So, you know, when you're testing your smoke alarm, check your Narcan, there's an expiry, and I think you can trade it in for an updated one at your local pharmacy. Little PSA there aside. But you know, a lot of us were taught to get our basic first aid training and then to get our basic CPR training or advanced CPR training. Narcan training, I suppose, is something that should be on that list as well.
Well, today it would be, and it would go hand in hand with those other training evolutions that you're preparing for. And it's just actually something that's been added in. So it's very common today in the training that you would receive. And yes, the public would also receive that information and have access to something like Narcan.
So there's your basic medical call, as you say, your ability to support and assist while paramedics are showing up. Anything else that's taking up a lot of your time? For example, you know, certainly when we read the report, obviously the role has changed, and I imagine whether it has or not, so should the training for all of our first responders. Like it or not, it's a reality. We are seeing more instances of mental health, or a lack of mental health, if you want to call it that. How does that impact your members' daily lives? What kind of volume are they seeing, and how are they outfitted and prepared to address it? And what's the opposite side? What's happening on the other side of some of these calls once the immediate crisis or critical element has been addressed successfully?
Right, well, you mentioned a couple of things there. So one is training. We spend a great portion of our day training. I know I mentioned that we respond to a lot of calls, but we still get hours of training in each day. And it's important that we're ready not only for the requirements of the province in our technical rescue skills, but we want to make sure that we're able to look after actually the entire county. And sometimes we're called for service of assistance outside of just in Barrie. And we have opportunity to help outside of that with things like trench rescue, confined space rescue, some water or ice rescues, high angle rescues, things like that. We're able to respond to all of those things. But back to the mental health side of things, we're very fortunate here where we have clinical oversight, and we have a really, really strong peer support team. So our system webs together to make sure that if you have a problematic call, you have someone to talk to that's one of your peers. And we have 15 or 16 of those ready to go to call it at a moment's notice. And that's really something that our members use regularly in order to be able to stay resilient so that they don't get too much into that trauma zone where they may struggle to go to the next call. And we want them to be healthy, of course, to remain ready to respond.
Mm-hmm. So when we come back from the break, you covered a lot of ground in there. I do want to dive a little bit deeper into both the pre-planning element of knowing your buildings that you're walking into or the types of environments you're walking into, but also some of those elements of training, those specific skill sets that you talked about. At the end of the day, though, your members are human. And again, if we're going to dispel another one of these Hollywood sort of, I don't want to call it inaccuracy, but yesteryear it was kind of like throw a little dirt on it and wash it off and you're good to go to the next call. That's not reality anymore. And that's something you spent a lot of your career really advocating for, was the health, the wellness, whether it was having certain forms of cancers recognized presumptively, as well as the PTSD and the mental health component.
Yes, we have not only worked through our government relations for those things, but we've also put those things in place back in Barrie that are going to allow us to look after our members, whether they're at the call, after the call, or days, weeks, months later. We want to make sure that they remain healthy and have an enjoyable career and hopefully an enjoyable retirement afterwards.
Absolutely, something to look forward to. Stay with us. Right after this break, we'll get into some of these highly specialized skill sets that firefighters and emergency responders train for on a daily basis. We'll be right back with more from Kevin White, Chief of Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government, as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and I'm thrilled to be continuing what I think is a fantastic conversation with Chief Kevin White from Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. I'm glad you're along for the ride. I'm asking all my childhood questions. I'm asking questions that I am imagining people at home might be interested in knowing about. We've covered a lot of ground so far. A number of your calls that we've talked about were kind of isolated, sort of segmented, and I have to imagine that many of your calls are more complex than just segmented. For example, maybe a scenario where there's somebody who is suffering both physically and potentially mentally as well, and it might be that they're in a position that's harder to access, et cetera. You talked about pre-planning. When you start baking the cake, for lack of a better analogy, sorry about that if that was terrible, but how do you sort of factor for the complexity, and is there an order of procedure, I suppose, that you look at when you're responding to a call?
Well, we do respond to a diverse amount of situations and call types, but what we focus on is compartmentalizing them into tall buildings, vertical firefighting, into residential firefighting. We also have other types of fires, vehicle fires, container fires, things like this. Sometimes there's fires in parks and fields. We are prepared for each different type of fire, and we train, get our crews ready, and we have the equipment in order to be able to do so. So we're ready to go no matter what the fire is.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that the first thing is save the life, the next thing might be save the structure. Fair?
Absolutely.
Statement? Okay.
100%.
So when you're doing that, how much of it is the technical and how much of it is sort of emotional response? Like, how do you train to not be emotional?
Well, we build that resiliency around emotion so that we can get in and get the job done. Sometimes it's a really difficult job. I would say 25% of our job is the worst day of your life we're here to help. So we're trying our best to help when it's very difficult for the community, for us, for everybody, and we have to build up that resiliency in order to be able to handle that and move on to the next call, because the next call is coming. We can't stop it. We can't turn the sirens off. We have to continue to respond, and we have to be ready for that.
Okay, so I'll just touch on it, totally off script, obviously, and all of this has been off script, but you just touched on something, and that is because of call volume. How many thousands, by the way?
12,000 per year.
12,000 calls per year, 33 a day on average. Hate to say it, but there is an element of get in and get out.
Definitely.
How familiar are you with the handoff? Someone's had their worst day of their life.
Yes.
You've got to go to the next call because that's where your skill set is required. What does the handoff look like?
Well, we carry some pamphlets for their own mental health. We also have after the fire booklets. So if it was a fire, they know what to do next, sort of a step-by-step guide to be able to help them. And we follow up with them to make sure that things are okay after the fact when they've had a traumatic situation like a fire.
But you might have a colleague that's their specialty, is the aftermath follow-up.
Yes, fire prevention branches are fantastic at being able to look after pre-planning, inspecting, making sure things are safe, and following up after in an investigation or making sure that things are okay for the residents after the fact and they're able to get back in.
Mm-hmm. So there are some fairly memorable events that have crossed our news feed. Right here at home, I can think of a recent tornado. Obviously, what was that, 2022, I believe. So that's mass, I don't want to call it mass casualty, but a mass structural casualty event. We had a recent cave or confined space that Barrie Fire and Emergency Services was called to as the closest technical expert to the scene. You've got some other skill sets that you train for, as you mentioned. Give us some insight into some of these hopefully not too often used skill sets, but when required, your crew is trained for it.
Well, I was going to say that. It's not every day a tornado rolls through town. We do what we can to prepare for that, and that's a unified command where we work together with those partnered agencies of the ambulances and the police vehicles in order to make sure that we're providing the service for that area that's been traumatized by that. I was at the tornado myself. I know that it was very difficult on that area of our community, and our community really rallied behind that segment of our community here in Barrie. So it was really awesome to see, but fortunately, very minor injuries, no fatalities, and to have that kind of destruction, which I'm sure many of us were there to witness, was really fantastic to be able to come out of that relatively unscathed.
Absolutely. So you do train for some specific incidents, though. You mentioned trench rescue, you mentioned confined space. Talk to us a little bit about, again, something that you're not going to be using in terms of daily muscle memory, but you've got to plan for, or you've got to prepare for it because you never know when that call's coming in. What's confined space? What defines that? What does it look like?
Well, I like that you said both plan and prepare, because that's what we've done. And a confined space is anything basically that's below grade or difficult to get into. A trench is anything that would take someone basically from their waist down. We're going to make sure that we can get them safely out of that trench. And we have props in order to be able to do both of those things. And that way we're able to train regularly while we're working. And I mentioned training on shift. We're doing that every day. So we're able to use these props and make sure that we can have the best possible skill set when the time happens and these emergencies happen in our city.
Actually, you gave me a throwback a few years back. I believe I was one of your props at one point, and that was out on the hard water surface that you talked about. Talk to me about sort of that dynamic of being a city that really is wrapped around a beautiful bay.
Well, the bay is beautiful, and sometimes it also has its emergencies to it. We've had many issues out on the water where we've had to respond from a land-based rescue, and in the ice, when it's hard, we can go a little further out, pretty much like our civilians can, and we want to make sure that they stay safe out there as well. So we're ready to respond to emergency out there. You probably remember one a couple of years ago where we had to call in helicopters. There was an ice flow that was breaking up quickly. We were able to save all 27 people that day, which is phenomenal, and our crews worked way above and beyond, but with the training that they had established and made sure that they were able to do that safely and bring everyone home to their families.
I think it's an appropriate time to mention that, you know, all of your approximately 200 colleagues, really, they're humans. They've got families to go home to, perhaps, et cetera. And it really is above and beyond. And there's some things that really just cross my mind as, you know, really what number of your calls, percentage-wise, or maybe a type of event that shows up more than it really should, is a preventable scenario?
Well, we work to prevent all emergencies. That's pretty easy for us. We try really hard, and we want people to be safe in our community. So we're out there trying to get their homes safe. We're trying to get them to drive safe without being distracted, live safe in general, not overdo their opioids, stuff like that. We want people to be safe. So I think that in that sense, we're trying to prevent those things, and we are a response which we're here to help after something goes wrong. Your worst day, we're here to help you with that and hopefully eliminate the negativity of that and make sure that you can move on with your life in a happy way.
Yeah, Chief, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this topic up. It's on the cover of every news article, whether it's on television, whether it's in social media, whether it's in the newspapers. It's on the minds of the citizens. It's something that appears to have been growing steadily, and it's obviously nothing but impactful. There are many of us who've been touched by it, whether it's within our own family, within our own colleagues, neighbors, et cetera. And that is whether it is isolated as a homelessness issue or isolated as an opioid addiction issue or more collective as a homelessness and opioid-related issue. And it's something that obviously first responders are dealing with, and we're talking about encampments. I'm going to leave the politicking, and I'm going to actually say it this way because I don't want to put you in a position that you should not be in or don't deserve to be in. I want to leave the politics out of it. I want to leave the politics to the politicians. I want to leave if there is a criminal element, leave that to those who are in law enforcement. But from a fire safety and emergency services perspective, obviously this is on your radar. What can you offer? Don't offer what you can't.
Well, we do the same thing with all types of fires, and that's to pre-plan the area as best we can, figure out where our water sources are, figure out where we position our apparatus for the best opportunity to fight the fire. And what we really want is to make sure that our people are safe. It doesn't really change our day of what people live in. We want to make sure that we get them out, we put the fire out, we get them off to our paramedics, and that we make sure that they're safe. So we're here to work with anyone in our community, no matter where they live.
Perfect. Thanks for that. When we come back from the break, I want to get into a couple other things. You've talked a lot about planning, prevention. Our city continues to grow. The population count continues to grow. The types of structures and the high density continues to grow. So we've covered some of that. When we come back from the break, let's talk about how you're planning for tomorrow's version of the City of Barrie. So stay with us, and we'll be right back with more from Chief Kevin White. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and we're talking fire and emergency service. We've covered a lot of ground, Chief White. We've covered prevention, we've covered planning to a degree, we've covered different scenarios, we've covered life-saving, we've covered the aftermath, we've covered a whole bunch of stuff. And yet there's more to talk about, and really what I want to get into is what comes next as this city continues to evolve, continues to grow, as the scenarios evolve, but also as the city itself evolves. You've got to be looking, I'm imagining, a decade plus out in ensuring that you're able to continue to deliver service. Now, off the top of the show, you said that you're able to cover the majority of the city in about 6-minute response time. We've got tons of traffic. We've got tons of construction happening. We've got roads that are under construction, bridges that are under construction. Talk to me about how you, as a professional firefighter and now in a role of chief in planning, are addressing things that maybe weren't part of sort of training 101, but now it's on your plate. You've got to be talking about readiness and engineering and traffic planning and all that stuff.
Well, we got a big advantage in the city by a few of those main roads opening, like Harvey Road or Bryan Drive. That'll really help us get across the city. But more importantly, specific to fire for us is opening of Station 6, which will happen in 2025. And that's at Prince William Way and Mapleview Drive. And that's going to really look after that southeast area of Barrie and make sure that we can get to any resident in the city of Barrie in 6 minutes. And that's really important for us out in that quadrant. And we are going to be able to service a much large area. There's a lot of homes out there, and we're ready to help in that area. 2025 is going to be a big year. We're going to get that station built and staffed and make sure that we're ready to go.
Now, 6 minutes isn't just a random number. There's a reason behind that being a target.
There is. It's a standard, and the standard's put out by the NFPA. That standard allows us to keep within our governing body, and we want to make sure that we do that, and we're exceeding that standard all times.
Okay, so NFPA, by the way, National Fire Prevention Association, what is that?
Protection.
Oh, protection. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. There you go, correcting me. That's good. So there's a standard. You're opening up in 2025 to meet that. Again, the population continues to grow. Let's dispel some rumors. I mean, I suppose there's a term heat map, but basically if you look where most of your calls are, there's an idea that most of them are in the downtown core. But there are some interesting facts about the types of calls that are not just exclusive to the downtown core. What are you seeing sort of as types of calls throughout the city?
Well, we do use heat maps, and we do have 3 trucks running out of our headquarters on Dunlop Street for that reason. We're ready to run those calls, a lot of single truck responses, and that would be out of our Dunlop Street headquarters. We have calls all over the city, though, for service, and we need to make sure that we have trucks that are geographically located to be able to get to your home quickly, regardless of where you live within our boundaries of Barrie.
Mm-hmm. Now, there could be an assumption that rural areas have a different level of service being applied. Fact or fiction?
Well, that's a fact. They just would not have the same amount of professional firefighters that would be able to work as career and make sure that they get their staff ready to hop on a truck within 45 seconds and get out the door. Mm-hmm. So yes, they're a little bit behind in that sense, but they're trying their best with the resources they have in their own communities.
Now, in the city of Barrie itself, though, we've got some higher density areas and we've got some lower density areas, and even some that are sort of coming up on rural. You know, there's definitely lower density areas. How does coverage affect each of these different areas? Is it based on population count? Is it based on draw a line on the map and you have that many people covering that area?
We do it with a geographic study, so we're ready to respond to all of those locations. Some unique things about a more rural area would be we would need to send a water source. So we send out a tanker truck or something like that, or there's not hydrants. But most of our city, we're lucky in order to be able to have hydrants and a water source and ready to respond, sort of more natural for our firefighters, and we're able to get there.
Mm-hmm. So some of the other things, as you're planning for the city, you're also planning for what's happening within the city. So last check, there are a whole number of, I mean, it's dozens and dozens of applications for building and development on the docket, so to speak. Interestingly enough, someone in your department is actually having a look at these and planning for actual development of low-rise and high-rise, but also events that are happening in the city. There's a member of your team who's taking a look at those applications. Talk to me about that.
Yes, we have fire prevention go out and make sure that anything from tree lighting to fireworks, they're all done safely. That's the event side of it. You also mentioned different styles of firefighting, and vertical firefighting is a huge issue moving forward. Our buildings are getting much higher. There's a lot of applications in for high-rise buildings, and it's a unique way to firefight. We have to get in. Sometimes we can't use the elevators, although they are firefighter elevators. Sometimes we have to send crews in walking, and if the building is 30 or 40 floors high, we have to be ready to go up there and bring people out, fight the fire. Handle the emergency situation. And that's something that's going to be very unique as we move through the next 10, 15, 20 years.
It's interesting, actually, as you were saying that, I was picturing you've had a number of colleagues, and I don't know about yourself as well, I think so, who've participated in the CN Tower stair climb on a regular basis.
Yes, that's correct. I actually did that with full bunker gear on for charity, and that was quite difficult. I think it took about 16 minutes going as fast as I could, so that was quite difficult. So as we round out the end of our time here, I do want to get into some of the sort of things that we might take for granted as residents, as citizens, things that we just don't think about. Is there something that kind of top of mind for you that you think you walk in and you just shake your head when you see stuff and you're like, how come this isn't obvious to you, it's obvious to me? Right. Well, what I'd like to highlight actually is what happens when you call 911. And you get our communications team, and we have a fully staffed communications team that actually handles 21 municipalities. Their focus is Barrie, and they take 33,000 calls per year on average. And they're able to take your call and dispatch the right emergency response to your location, and they are amazing. So they're your first line of when you call 911, they answer the phone. They'll teach you how to deal with the problem. They'll send the emergency response. They'll stay on the phone with you and make sure you're safe and calm and go through the situation. And they're an amazing team, and they're able to do that. That's what most residents don't think of until they call 911. And then, man, is it ever exciting to have them on the other end of the line.
Absolutely, and these are folks who are trained cross-discipline, if I'm not mistaken then.
Definitely. They're ready to go and help you with whatever it is over the phone.
And I can imagine, I mean, you said this earlier on in the show, that we're here to respond and be there for you when you're having your worst day. I mean, I don't know too many people who call 911 for anything other than something that's not going well in their life. And these are folks, again, they're human. And they're hearing 33,000 calls for service, and that's got to take a toll.
That's right. And I mentioned earlier in the program that we have clinical oversight. We do assessments on our staff regularly to make sure that they're doing their checkup from the neck up, and we want to make sure that they're looking after themselves. You know, that goes back to eating healthy, exercise, having a good family life. You want to make sure that you have balance in your life, and I think that's really important no matter what area of emergency service you work in.
Yeah, I have to just throw this out there because I did have a chance to take a quick peek. It's quite fascinating when you look at the technology, but you also look at the ergonomics of the layout that they're working with. I think that has advanced or improved. I'm sure there's room to go, but sit-stand desks and things like that are taken into consideration. But talking about things that we either take for granted or just simply aren't aware of, yeah, there are people who are doing a long shift, just call after call after call, and really holding the hand, so to speak, of someone through until your trucks arrive or there's a handoff, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. That's got to be pretty intense. What's something else maybe from the resident side that we do that you might, sort of shake your head at, like, that's not a good idea, you should change this part of your daily life, your structure, in terms of living safely at home? What are some things that we kind of overlook?
Well, we want to make sure that everyone's safe, and I know we talked earlier about candles. Candles can be used. There's a time to use candles, but you want to make sure that you put them out before you leave the room. We've had cats start fires with candles, things like that. We want to make sure that you're safe. There's any type of fire. I know we've talked about cooking emergencies. You have to remember that you started cooking, and that is extremely important to make sure that that fire doesn't get out of control, that pot doesn't boil over, and all of a sudden you have a kitchen fire. It happens quite regularly. We want to make sure that people are safe, whether they're in an apartment condo or a residential house. We want to make sure that cooking stays safe.
Now, you are dealing with and training for the eventuality or the likelihood of a scenario happening, and it's all about, as you said, pre-planning and preparedness. Some things that we can do, okay, remember that you're cooking, fantastic. Give yourself a visual reminder or an auditory reminder that you're cooking. We talked about the smoke detector campaign for life.
Alarm for life, yes.
Alarm for life, thank you very much around that. What about knowing your escape plan? We talked about even going to the movie theater, for example. Mm-hmm. Give me some ideas around the word you would use, I guess, egress?
That's right. We want to make sure, whether you're in a place of assembly, when you go to your place of worship or you go to a movie theater, you want to have an eye on where your exits are and have a bit of a plan of how to get there. That is when you're out in public. But when you're at home, we want to make sure you have an escape plan to get from wherever you are to a safe place outside. And that's for all of your family members. It's something that's a bit overlooked. And it's something I've done coming in here to the studio today to make sure I know where the exits are and how to get back out of here. Because when you put your head down and you're led into a certain building, you may not pay attention to those things. But it's really important to know how to get out, especially in time of emergency when you're super heightened from that.
Mm-hmm. So when you're coming, when someone dials 911, we talked about that standard of 6 minutes, but 6 minutes is fast in terms of response time. But when you're standing there, it's not fast. I mean, it's a long 6 minutes. And I think it's worth highlighting or reminding that over the decades, the type of home construction and the products we bring into our home, our furniture, it actually does tend to ignite quicker, it's more toxic, it burns at a higher temperature, et cetera. So 6 minutes is a long time, and I guess the point is being prepared. And by the way, leave everything that doesn't matter. Bring the cat, bring the dog if you can, of course, but get yourself out, because 60 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, we'll go in and get your cat and dog. Please leave them and save yourself. I think that's what's most important in this, is figure out how to get yourself out and leave the firefighting to us. We're here to help.
Well, I can't think of a more appropriate way to round this out and finish this off. Kevin White, new chief to Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. Thanks for your decades of service. Thanks to you and your colleagues who serve alongside you. I really have enjoyed this time with you. I appreciate you making the time to come in, and I definitely look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks, Arif.
And we'll see you again next time on Barrie City on the Move. Thanks for joining.